Welcome to Drifting Deeper, a podcast about consciousness, culture, and human potential. I'm Nicholas Ely. I'm coming to you from the West Coast, and I'll be your host. Today's guest is Elizabeth Oing. She's a mindset coach from California who specializes in enhancing the tool set of young people to help them handle a rapidly evolving place in the world. In our brief discussion, we talk about the sense of self in a changing world, some of the challenges the younger generation are facing. We take a whack at the nomenclature of the other-than-conscious states of mind, and Elizabeth was kind enough to share a few tools of her trade to help define and maintain that aforementioned sense of self that we need to function in this wacky world we live in. On a quick technical note, you'll have to forgive a few audio glitches in this one. I've cleaned it up as best I can, but it appears those gremlins just will not be denied. So without further ado, we'll move on to the interview. Okay, so Elizabeth, thanks for coming back again. Apologize for the issues last time, but gremlins happen.
This is true.
So when we were talking beforehand, we were talking about you go by the designation of life coach, was it?
Mindset coach.
Mindset coach. Okay, that is actually really cool. And can you tell me a little bit more about how a mindset coach operates?
People do usually ask, they're like, "Oh, is that like a life coach?" And the distinction that I came across that made the most sense to me, or that I came to on my own, was my understanding of life coach, whether that's what they actually do or just the association that comes to mind for me, is this is someone who helps you plan out your life, in the sense of eliciting goals and possibly even giving gentle coaching and advice in that direction. It's like, well, this is something that might work for you. And that's not necessarily something that I'd say I have a lot of either experience with or love for. What I have spent many years studying is how your attitude can determine everything. It can change the worst situation into something that can actually be a very powerful experience of transformation and growth. And so to me, that while it's possible to control one's circumstances to an extent, to say like, oh, I'm going to set this goal, or I'm going to walk this path, if you don't have the right attitude backing it, it really cuts into the success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everybody has those dreams that they never follow up on because they have the emotion to do something with their lives, but they never actually follow up, and they just kind of fritter their life and their experience away, not accessing those resources that they have. So you operate in a way where you help people find those resources and apply it to various areas in their life. Is that right?
Exactly, especially because another powerful thing that I've found is sometimes by making, while you might have in mind, I want to achieve this goal or I want to bring more of this into my life, by instead of focusing on that, focusing instead on what inside of me is keeping me from achieving that, from moving in that direction, or as, Chris Thompson or Mike Mandel say, what is it that I'm doing that's exquisitely maintaining the problem? By focusing instead on that, it can get your arrow pointed in the trajectory of that initial goal, and also things that you never thought were even possible. That it's like that one little key, that one little tumbler in the lock when you put the key in and kind of turn it. Instead of getting into the bedroom, you realize that you just opened the doorway into Narnia by a different key, and seeing kind of like, oh, I hadn't realized all of these other places. And I really like the idea of approaching things sideways. like instead of approaching a problem head on, to just kind of come at it from the side, so that if it's like, I'm having this problem, here's one thing that's influencing it, let me work on that, and then just see what develops and emerges from that.
Very cool. All right. Um, okay, so let me ask you this. I'm going to preface it with a brief story. I was talking with Freddie Jacquin at HypnoThoughts last year. Freddie, of course, one of the big names there, and not name dropping in any way. But what really impressed me with Freddie was his humility and his dedication to actually doing work more than profiting from work. And of course, that's just my objective opinion. I'm not speaking in any way. But Freddie had an amazing type of inner game, as some unfortunate elements love to use that phrase. But I believe inner game, of course, is something that you have inside yourself to help you push through particular things. Where do you think people can access their own particular best mindset or inner game in order to pursue whatever goal it is they're looking for?
I think the only place to look for that is inside, which is one thing I love about the coaching profession of all different kinds, the business coach, the life coach, the mindset coach, is that it's less about, I'm the expert and I'm going to tell you what you need to do. It's, well, what resonates with you would be the best thing to do. What do you feel? How do you feel that would work for you? Let's try this out and see what happens. And so in that sense, you see other, I don't know if you see it so much from some of the big name, like self-help gurus and the people trying to help you live your life. They're like, well, this is the truth. This is the way to go about doing it, when everyone's different. So by saying that, the way that Freddie does things, if someone tried to point at that and say, oh, well, that must be the way that everyone should do things to have that inner game. But Freddie is Freddie, and Freddie is awesome.
Yeah.
But Freddie is the way that he is, and that inner game doesn't necessarily work for someone else. So by reconnecting with that inner sense of wisdom, I feel really is what unlocks not just the inner game, but if the inner game is a suit or a jacket, it's not about putting on your mom's dress or your dad's jacket. And that's what I feel like people do when they look at, oh, this is what Tony Robbins is doing, and this is what Tony Robbins is saying, and I'm going to do that. That's not putting on the one that fits you best, that flatters your own figure, as opposed to kind of connecting inside and reconnecting with all of those parts that we're so distracted or become separate from as we're growing up. That's what brings out the inner game that has the sustainability to subsist even against the various forces and maelstroms and effects that we come up with in our lives.
Gotcha. Okay, I think that's really well put. We have an analog in the martial arts where somebody will mimic the shidoshi or shifu or whoever they're training under. They'll mimic everything that they can until they reach a certain point when they realize that their actions have now become accustomed to the way that their bodies move and the way that their minds work. And at that point, the martial artist truly starts to become the artist portion of the martial artist, which is always very satisfying to see a student reach that point. Now, as far as let's say the modeling idea or the modeling model of growth and learning that they use in psychology, where people model themselves after their parents and such, as you were mentioning. What do you think is the best indicator? Because I know that you work with a lot of young people who probably hit that transitional phase there. In your experience, what do you think is the greatest indicator a person, or a young person specifically, would be able to notice that tells them it's time to start, tentatively putting that foot out the door, stepping out from under the shadow of the people that are looking for, and, hang up their own shingle, so to speak, and declare themselves to the world in whatever way seems fit? I ask hard ones.
Me too. I like it. Um, I'm not going to go down the philosophical bent of how does anyone really know when one is ready, because that could be a whole rabbit hole altogether. Um, I Again, the wardrobe imagery is just coming up for me because at some point, yes, we do model our parents, we model the people we respect, we model our friends.
Yeah.
And as we're doing that, my personal understanding belief is if we're connected with that inner part of ourselves, that felt sense, like James Tripp talks about the kind of felt sense within. Yeah. You just start to get a sense when it fits so comfortably that it's like it's like it was made for you versus, okay, this fit me before I hit my growth spurt. But now that I've grown up, it's pulling a little bit on the shoulder. And can I take this to someone and get an alteration? It's kind of the checking in there. It's like all of a sudden, this doesn't fit. I'm experiencing like an inner dissonance. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily cognitive. People talk about cognitive dissonance all the time, but there's also emotional dissonance, and there's kind of more of a, without getting too woo-woo, spiritual dissonance.
Yeah.
That it's just something doesn't fit, and by developing that, by cultivating those opportunities for spending the time with yourself. Mm-hmm. And paying attention to that, you can become aware of, I'm getting angry at this person not because they're doing something, but because I'm projecting my own inner discomfort onto them.
Gotcha. Okay. And projection, something that's actually come up a lot in the past couple of weeks, both in my personal life and with my client base, where a number of people have come forward and recently I've gotten a whole lot of weight loss clients, which didn't used to happen. Usually that was a New Year's resolution boom kind of thing, where people are like, hey, I want to lose 30 pounds this year. I'm like, great, let's do it. And then I never hear from them again. But recently that's kind of happened. And what I have found, just like many other people who specialize in that particular hypnotic subset, so many people have that tendency to bring that trauma forward and just kind of project it, not necessarily onto someone else, but onto their life circumstances, onto their sense of self, which is a really weird, again, philosophical rabbit hole. But if we are projecting something upon ourselves, who is it that's doing the projecting and who is it that's receiving the projecting? That's kind of a fun little rabbit hole to someone else can chase down at some point, I'm sure, like a pretentious PhD thesis. But speaking of inner and outer worlds, do you prefer the word unconscious or the term subconscious, or other than conscious?
I was about to say neither. I'm going to go outside of that. I have been coming to prefer more of the Dave Dobson other than conscious, because in part because of the discussions that have come up around subconscious versus unconscious. Mm-hmm. Although I will say I do still use the term unconscious, and some just because of the tricks from Erickson of being able to the ambiguity in there, saying you're unconscious to mean your unconscious mind versus you are.
Yeah, that's one of my faves.
Yeah, I do love that, having experienced that effect. So, but when discussing, I do prefer, especially when discussing with the actually I couldn't say that. I was about to say when discussing with more of the layman, I wouldn't use other than conscious. I might use unconscious, but that's not the case. I think I kind of mix it a little bit evenly. Yeah. Just because of, like I said, the associations, negative or otherwise, that people have with subconscious versus unconscious.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I've also found that a number of people Because I live and work in a college town, and of course I deal with a lot of people in their early 20s who know everything the way that everyone in their early 20s does. Um, but yeah, I found a number of people prefer to debate as to the existence of the unconscious and subconscious, which always amazed me, that mentality coming to a hypnotist to tell them that the unconscious doesn't exist. And eventually you can develop language patterns that just in that argument that just kind of lull them into the trance, and the change work can start at that point, which was a fun little thing. But moving forward into that conversation here, um, here's an easy question for you. What do you think consciousness is?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask if I thought the
I
unconscious
drop.
existed. Well, I mean, the unconscious doesn't really exist. Neither does the conscious. I
Hmm.
mean, they're metaphors, which is, particularly appealing to me. And that's usually the direction that I kind of steer that conversation in. If we can't point on an fMRI machine, on a scan and say, oh yeah, that's the unconscious and that's the conscious.
Okay.
It's a metaphor to help us kind of understand and bring slightly out of abstraction to something a little bit more relatable.
Okay.
So consciousness to me is awareness.
Okay.
So whatever I'm aware of is what I'm conscious of, and whatever I'm not aware of, either temporarily or permanently, is other than conscious or unconscious.
Interesting. Okay, I like that. I want to say it was Mike who had been talking in his academy when he was talking about metaphor. He was explaining how the mind works on metaphor. And on exploration, of course, we find all these really cool things. Our sensory sets do, in fact, translate and apply meaning. All of this happens other than consciously. I'm going to have to make that a habit. I like that particular term. So I almost went down a metaphorical rabbit hole with you there. I'd be like, so what do you think the purpose of applying metaphor is? And what do you think life is without a metaphor? But let's not do that. Because that's just a long walk down a strange road. So we had discussed before, and I think I briefly mentioned, you tend to work with younger people. Can you give me, of course, without revealing any confidential details, what is the kind of thing that you generally see the youngest generation working with, or what you work with them on? Is there a commonality of issues, or is this latest generation? I'm not going to do the millennial uh, busting thing my generation is known for, but what do you find them struggling with the most?
Anxiety.
Yeah.
There's a lot of anxiety. That was really what I started noticing over, watching them over the course of 15 years when I started working with them, was that there was a major uptick in anxiety that also correlated with slightly more stigmatization of the mental health profession.
Yeah.
So I have students, I would have young people who would just have panic attacks every day, like full on hyperventilating, just could not really get a sense, and they had no coping strategies for it.
Yeah.
And aside from medication. So definitely the anxiety. I don't want to say there, I kind of fall between the lines on this one, whether there is or is not more pressure on the millennial generation, and also the new one, Gen Z, the iGen is the current young people. I do feel like there's a greater disconnect from the sort of socialization, the social sphere, with the popularity of the internet. And while on the one side people say, oh, we're more connected because we have friends in other countries. Like, yes, but it's a different connection.
Yeah.
It's a different quality of connection that is challenging to us on an evolutionary level.
Yeah.
Because it's so different from, I mean, humans are social animals where we came up in tribes. There are enough similarities to primates that we need that social structure of some sort. And a computer screen can, if cultivated the right way, provide a reasonable facsimile, if not the actual replacement. However, I don't feel like that's been fully explored to the extent that it is being treated properly. It's just kind of haphazard if someone manages to find that replacement. More often than not, there's that disconnect, and also bringing more out into the public sphere.
Yeah.
Things that used to be very private are now, can now be witnessed by people you've never met before, which adds a whole nother level to that anxiety and social status and stresses.
Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking, just from what I've seen, I don't work, well, no, I do work with some millennials from the local college. I haven't really tapped into the younger generation from there at this point. But what I tend to see, and I think that a huge portion of the anxiety, which I wholeheartedly agree, anxiety is just kind of crushing the latest generations and working its way, I've noticed, up into higher generations as well. Between the economic peril, let's just call it what it is, that we're experiencing globally now, the upcoming changes we have with how we interact on the computer, its extension into virtual reality, artificial intelligence and its philosophical implications, CRISPR technology and how we can rewrite our genes. All of these particular things are really, I believe, forcing the millennial generation and iGen off into the almost satirical point of view where we have to really question what our self is now, because it used to be we could justify ourselves through writing or through videotaping or even YouTube blogging or podcasting like this. But now that we have dangerous technologies that can apply our faces to other people's bodies doing things, we can no longer justifiably say this is me. So all these different perils are coming up that are in weird ways inhibiting a person's ability to find self and meaning in our lives. What advice would you give to both the generation facing that challenge and the parental generation for that? How best they could be able to guide their children who are born or yet to be born in this weird and trying time that we have?
Man, if I could answer that one. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it really is about building in that time for introspection and checking in with the self.
Yeah.
Not in like a self-actualization sort of sense, but just kind of like, the other thing about the Instagram culture is how much of identity is based on other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting transformation from tribal days and social status. It's still the same basic element. It's measuring your worth by how others perceive you. But it's no longer the people that you have chosen as your tribe, the people you respect, the people you interact with on a regular basis. Now it's more, these are strangers interacting with you, and it's the question, the challenge of what people are posting on Facebook, on Instagram, is carefully cultivated.
Yeah.
There aren't as many, if there are any more of those raw moments that where you're not trying to put a face forward. I mean, with filters and everything, that if someone only knows you from your online profile, do they really know you? Because they're only knowing what you want to put forth.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's definitely a lot to the I feel like if you have a strong sense of self, it doesn't matter what other things go on out there. It doesn't matter what other people say. You can bounce back from it. So the best advice that I feel like I could give both the generation and the parents or the older relatives raising these generations is to encourage that exploration and spending that time and that focus inwards.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think that the mistake a lot of parents make, and I don't mean that in any way in an accusatory manner, uh, and I should say not a mistake they make, but a mistake of society, is they do not spend the time teaching parents how to build rapport with their children anymore. And that's certainly a consequence of today's economic requirements. You need either one rich parents or two working parents in order to take care of even just one child these days, which is a shame. Frankly, I find it rather disappointing that we have entire swaths, starting from my generation, with the huge departure from the two-parent household stereotype into the one-parent household stereotype, and now we, of course, have even more complex versions of parenting that happen these days. And I think that that's something that feeds into, most certainly, the almost dystopian universe that the latest group has to deal with, the latest generation has to walk into. Now, you had mentioned how the Instagram generation, everybody's using filters on Snapchat or what have you, and they're kind of always putting their best foot forward because they are their own product that they sell at this point in time, which ultimately isn't very psychologically sustainable. And what I had the realization of the other day, shortly after the unfortunate incident in El Paso, I'm not going to make it dark, but I had this weird surreal moment where, in this weird Snapchat, Instagram moment where everybody's always, got that carefully cultivated downward facing kind of selfie to catch their best angles kind of thing. We are in a weird spot where people are only putting their true selves out in moments of stress or peril. And I do feel that it was a weird lesson to take from such a horrible event, but I do feel that if people made the more solid effort to have those real connected moments with, their loved ones, with their friends, or so much as saying hello and making a new friend with a stranger, we may find ourselves in a better society, or dare I say, a better world if governments would play along as well. So in that context of building those solid moments where you're not communicating through technology, or you're not some blowhard who talks too much on a podcast sometimes, what technique do you recommend people learn the most for building those true non-artificial connected moments? I swear I came in with this list of super conversational questions, and I had them all in my head, and then my unconscious was like, no, hit it with this.
Can we work for this? Ooh. All right. This is a technique that I did not get from hypnotherapy certification. I mean, it was covered kind of sort of briefly in my training, but it was a technique that I had come across from something else, a different level of study. It's the idea of sort of doing a regular practice of assessing and inventorying your connections, whether that's if you believe that connections on an energetic level, like Akka chord connections or what have you, or if this is just how you wish to represent it metaphorically. Some magical traditions and practices may refer to this as grounding and centering.
Yeah.
But just kind of taking the experience of considering all of the connections that you have to people in life, and just really sitting mindfully with like a benign attention
Yeah.
of just like, okay, if I were to think about my significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, how would that connection represent? Where is it in my body? What does it seem to be like?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I feel about that? Like wherever it's connected, what are the sensations around it?
Okay.
And just kind of looking at, is this serving me in a beneficial way? Or is this draining? Is the flow unequal? Is this really pulling from me more than I'm getting back? Does it look diseased? And then either choosing to separate from it, to do a cord cutting or a cord clearing,
Yeah.
or am I getting some benefit? Is this worth cultivating? And what could I do to improve it? Does it need to be moved somewhere else in my body? Because the unconscious works, the other than conscious, works symbolically.
I almost caught you on that one.
I use both. We do function symbolically, metaphorically,
Mm-hmm.
just in our speech, in our language. The reason it's difficult to become aware of metaphors is because we're swimming in them all the time. A fish doesn't notice the water until you take it out of it.
Yeah.
So I love those processes that involve taking a very abstract concept and putting it in something that's more relatable, whether that's giving it a physical shape or a color or a direction. So just kind of being aware of where am I putting that energy in connection, and is this something that, checking in with felt sense, is this something that I want to continue feeling? Is this something that's worth fixing to serve my higher purpose?
Excellent. Excellent. I'm really glad you threw in that last bit there, because I was going to segue into the whole higher purpose concept at a moment. Yeah, I'm just hitting you with all the big stuff right here. I hope that's okay.
Sure.
I'll stay away from all the like tumultuous stuff that'll get us both nuked on Facebook or something like that. But
yeah, let's not do that.
Yeah, a list of things you don't say on the internet. So how do you feel a person can... I have my own philosophy of finding the higher purpose, and I based it on Jung's work. But how do you feel, in your experience, what is it that can tell a person what their higher purpose is, or what their... I guess another way to put it is, how can they find the best way to be their best selves for their best purpose? That way we can cut out all the pseudo-spiritual stuff.
This almost sounds kind of circular, but I feel like you're in the path that's going to elicit your best self when your best self is being elicited naturally.
Okay.
Without you attempting to apply the filters, without you saying, I look better in this light. It's just, it happens, and it feels so natural that sometimes, not always, but often, other people notice it before you do.
Yeah.
Me going into teaching, that was not something, it was not like I was born and decided from a very young age, I wanted to be a teacher. It was, I had other ideas for a career path. It didn't pan out. And someone very close to me, who was a teacher, suggested it. And even though at the time parts of me were just railing against it, going, no, this would be dumb. This is not going to work out. Just as soon as I started doing it, it just kind of, it felt natural. It just started coming out, and I wanted to do things to make it better, not because I was afraid of getting fired, but because the better I was doing, the better I was feeling.
Yeah, I like that. That is that circular kind of behavior thing is very much something that we find in, I think, every part of hypnosis. That's a big one in induction pre-frames, and of course in conversational hypnosis, that particular language pattern, and this means, because, and that kind of stuff. It's such a powerful thing to use in any conversation, hypnotically, or just when you're making a connection with a person.
And just to lighten this up from the more spiritual, the model that I look at it as is from My Little Pony. Not gonna lie.
Okay. So
Just
let's flesh that out a little bit.
I don't think they did this so much in the first 4 generations, but in the current iteration of My Little Pony, when the little ponies are born, they don't have the little marks on their flanks, and it's up to them to try out lots of different things. And when they discover their life's purpose, the one thing they're supposed to be doing, then the mark appears, and they know that just because it's so easy, it's so natural. They fall into it. They don't need to put any real effort, or if they do put effort into it, it's just wonderful. And if they tried to do something in life other than that, they feel miserable. They hate it. They can't deal with it. So when I decided to start a coaching practice, and I commented about it to a friend, he started laughing. He said, "You earned your cutie mark."
Did anything like appear on your side?
No.
Like that? Okay.
The context this came up in is I was talking about designing a new tattoo for it.
Oh, okay. So you did want a cutie mark.
Something like that.
It's kind of funny how those other than conscious things kind of pop into mind and kind of cause that thing to happen. So aside from client work, where, or I should say, how have you seen changes in your approach to life and your personal philosophies and how you generally live? What changes have occurred since you started actually studying hypnosis and coaching?
I would say one of the, I wanted to say best kept secrets, but it's actually not really well kept, and it's not even that much of a secret. So it's probably one of the best fringe benefits of doing change work, especially on the unconscious level, whether that's NLP, EFT, hypnosis, or other modalities. While you're working with clients, you're working on your own stuff too.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of the changes that have come for me, I found out about it after. It wasn't like I sat down and said, I've got this problem I'm going to work on. It was in having a conversation with a client and kind of helping them through that. Just because we don't script out conversations. These are things that it comes up from the other than conscious mind. So we don't sit down and think, I'm going to say this. Or if we do, it's a very stilted conversation. It's very scripted. Yeah. So sometimes those gems just come out of the other than conscious, and my conscious mind kind of goes, wait a minute, weren't we just struggling with that last week? Okay, taking that on board to remember to learn from.
Yeah.
So there has been a lot of transformation in that sense, in my own outlook and coping abilities. And like many others in our profession, I got on this path by having had something happen to me in the past, trying to do many things to improve it, more traditional things that didn't work, and not really finding a solution or finding the most powerful solution through hypnotherapy. And at first it was going to a hypnotherapist as a client, and then it was during my training process, just the things that we were working on, things just started aligning. And even my students, I actually just had a conversation with one of my students a few months ago. She had me as a freshman, and she was a senior this year. And so it'd been 4 years later. And she came up to me at the end of the show. I hadn't seen her since freshman year. And then I had been kind of seeing her a little bit during the year. She wasn't my student, but she was taking a dance class, and I was in the theater too, doing other things. And at the end of the recital, she said, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I've just noticed over the last 4 years, the last couple years especially, you just glow so much more now. You've like changed. I can't even put my finger on it. I don't know. And I got like getting a little teared up thinking about it now. But it's just that kind of more people outside of me were noticing it than myself.
Yeah, that is definitely something that I think all cultures have an experience and a method of codifying that particular thing. In remember when I was exploring Taoism a couple of years ago. It's a very interesting philosophy, but one of the things that was emphasized was when one moves in conjunction with the Tao, or the universal way of being, things start to not necessarily happen easier, but you find yourself moving more in sway with these, what a hypnotist would call unconscious or other than conscious forces. And people begin to notice things. Of course, they tend to codify it as, your chi or your ki increases and such. But I have definitely seen the same thing where people make, comments. The weirdest one that I heard was, I'm 42, so I'm not expecting any more growth spurts. But I've had more than one person ask, did you get taller? And I'm about 6'4", so that's kind of the last thing that I expect at this point in my life. But I came to understand that as working through personal issues and those resolutions occur, and move out of the way for more resources to come through, I tended to slouch less. So suddenly I was actually standing at a more fuller extension than normal. It was a very interesting physical manifestation of that emotional shift. But you're absolutely right. There is a strange kind of glowing experience that comes along with that. So that was an interesting manifestation of that. Looks like we're coming up on our 45-minute mark. So I'm going to go ahead and let you go here in just a moment or two. Of course, I do want to say thanks again so much for your patience. I'm so glad the gremlins didn't show up this time. I saged everything. No, I absolutely didn't. Any way to get rid of gremlins, I tried. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything that you wanted to get out there, let the people know how to reach you, what they can reach you for, or any general advice you want to toss out into the screaming abyss of the internet?
Yeah, people are welcome to visit me at my website. Is mindset.eoing.com. Okay. Spelled EOING. Mm-hmm. I do post articles and videos on just various observations, kind of thought-provoking, empowering questions, just ponderings and video tips to things that I hope people could take and apply in their own lives, and get some benefit from using, or they're welcome to, they can contact me from there. If they're interested in scheduling sessions, I work primarily online, doing virtual sessions, so I can work with anyone in the world.
Excellent.
Long reach, anywhere I should say English speaking. My languages are not adept enough to do that quick translation.
Give it time. I'm sure some machine learning thing will be able to translate for us in real time one day. All right. Well, I'll go ahead. I'll make sure all your information shows up in the video notes on YouTube. Once again, Elizabeth, it was an extreme pleasure talking to you and meeting you, and I hope to talk to you again at some point. So, are you going to be at HypnoFox this year?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. I got a bead on a ticket, so I might end up being able to.
Oh, good. I saw that you weren't. I wasn't sure if you were going to make it or not.
Oh, it's you know how scheduling gets. So yeah, if I end up making it, I'll shoot you a text, and maybe we can meet at the Alligator Bar and toast to our success.
Of course, love to, and I'm happy that we did this again. The conversations went into some really interesting places, fun places.
Very different when I don't script it and I just let it come from the back of the brain. All right, Elizabeth, I want to say goodbye. Thanks again, and you have a great week. All right.
You too.
Or I guess weekend since it's Thursday.
Yeah, coming up.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
And there you have it. Words of wisdom from Elizabeth Oing. If you'd like to follow up with Elizabeth on anything from today's interview, she can be reached at mindset.eoing.com. I want to say thanks to Elizabeth for joining us again today, and thank you to the Gremlins for not coming back and destroying another full-length interview. And I'd like to say thanks to you for listening for the entire interview. Do remember to go out and have yourself a great day. Love each other and love yourselves. We'll see you next time.